Don't throw out this stuff that is actually. We'll get going. Of course, as we've been every day something changes. And you're no doubt thinking, what am I saying? Every hour something changes. It's an ongoing adventure. I was thinking about the idea of vocation, and all of us have. For a moment, I thought he was actually going to lock it. I have a couple of faculty members, and they said, they came to me. This is separately a while back in the spring, and said, Dr. Kasai, I have students who are showing up late for my class. I think I'm just going to lock the door after 5 minutes. And of course you can't, right? I mean, and I said, actually, no. I said, work with attendance and so on, but you cannot simply be locking the door. I don't mean closing the door. They want to lock the door, and no, you can't. So. I told him not to lock the door. So anyway, I was thinking about, frankly, our vocation, and it occurs to me, Max Weber, who is talking about, it doesn't really have to do with our living, which, by the way, almost runs contrary to how we think about vocation, because we sometimes use it as a way of talking about our jobs, our profession, and that sort of thing. But of course, it's different, because it has to do, as the word not just suggests, but as the word means. There are a lot of things we have to interpret from one point to the next to find out maybe what was going on. We know the word means, of course, calling. And what Weber is saying, of course, it's what we are summoned to become that really is our vocation, because we are constantly in a state of becoming. We have not arrived, and I hate to break the news to you, particularly to Alan here, you have not arrived at the summit of your life as yet, okay? You're still in a state of becoming, right? We are always going to be better. Alan will take a little while to get better, but it's gonna. We're always going to be in a state of becoming better. And then I was thinking about what is going on in our world, and the idea of loyalty. And I'm constantly, even before this time together, I've been thinking that loyalty is an important quality to have. It is. Period. But what does it mean to be loyal at all costs? That there is nothing that will stop me from being loyal. And I hope that there are some things that will stop us. And at least as we think about it, not just sort of in this season, but maybe particularly in this season, right? We want really to be thinking about faithfulness, about what does it mean to be faithful. And of course, and so we sing, "O come all ye faithful," and of course, right? Or in the original, we're talking about the Latin fideles, that's the word. I don't recall that we have an Advent hymn or any other seasonal hymn that has to do with loyalty. Okay? But it's about faithfulness. What does it mean to be faithful to our calling? What does it mean to be faithful to that which brings us into becoming better humans? And then I was thinking, as is so often the case, one of the many reasons that all of us in this room should be learning Hebrew, except Alan. One of the reasons we should, of course, it's, we're not going to do that, and nor am I suggesting we should, but of course, we go back to, it's not actually the original because we don't have any original text. Right, we have copies of copies of copies. No original text. If someone is trying to sell you an original text, hang on to your wallet and walk away. It doesn't exist. Okay. But one of the great joys of it is that we have in Hebrew, among other languages, what I would call an economy of words. Right. So Emmanuel, of course, in case you missed it this morning for about, 25 different times, right? It means God with us, right? There's no verb in there. It's assumed, right? There's no infinitive to be in there. It literally means God with us. And it's really an I. I know we use E as well, okay? But in Hebrew, it's just one word. It's one word. We know the El, of course, is the shortened form of Elohim, means God, right? With. And this new here is kind of like a suffix to the word us. And so you have to think about God with us as one word, and there is no sort of verb in there. We assume the verb, of course, God is with us. So, you might also remember, even this morning, we're thinking about, and we'll talk a little bit about this in a moment, the idea of, you may recall the hymn, there is a verse in the hymn that talks about wisdom coming, right? Remember, go back and look at the hymns. It begins with wisdom. But the opening verse also talks about that which was from the beginning. And we'll look at wisdom, which, by the way, was from the beginning. It's almost, we are on one of the sort of beautiful ancient carvings of a gateway into a quad. We don't really have quads in this country at the universities. There might be one or two in some of the Ivy League schools and so on, but we really don't have quads. But it's all over, in the older universities, particularly in Britain. And you enter a quad, and it opens up into this typically magnificent, ancient buildings. And in the quad, where I was located doing my research, as you enter, you're walking the street, and all of a sudden you see this stone carving of the gateway into the quad, and it simply says, "In principio erat verbum," right? Latin. In the beginning was the word. That's what's carved in as you enter. In principio erat verbum. In the beginning was the word. But also in the beginning was wisdom, which we'll talk about, right? Which, if the word was Jesus, who was wisdom? Okay, we'll look at that in a second. All right, but to continue, Isaiah chapter 2 and Micah chapter 4. One of the things that some folks, not us in this room here because we're enlightened, but well, not Alan, but one of the things about some folks who sort of hear certain texts that they may not like. And I've heard this, where folks would say, well, Amos had a chip on his shoulder, or some people in our society would categorize Amos as part of the radical left, for example. I'm not sure who would say such thing. But the point is that it's not just Amos. We saw in Isaiah week after week after week. But we also have Micah. We're not hearing from Micah in this Advent season. We will in time. But what I'm getting at is that these prophets, many of whom actually, if not verbatim, very close to repeating the same message. Now, when one person says it, it's one thing. And you might say, well, you know, that's just one perspective, or that's just one idea. And by the way, we do that in our society. We may not like what one of the texts in Scripture says, so we go looking for others that actually resonate with us. We love that idea, and we do that, right? But what happens when others say it again and again and again? All of a sudden, you have to take notice. So, and I typically don't do this, but I have this text up here, right? And with all of the talk that is going on, and you might even have seen, even this morning, about language of blockades again, right? So this is not some kind of idea that, you know, is gone by. It's current. So what these texts tell us is that there's a recognition that instruments of war exist. This is not like it. The text does not say, I wonder if instruments of war exist. And if they do, this is what we should do. It actually said, when people leave, I always take it personally, you know, because it's sort of like when lightning comes, do you really want to be next to him, Chand? You know, so. So instruments of war exist. By the way, it's a statement. It's established. And we don't, here is part of my struggle. These texts, both Micah and Isaiah, are now over 3,000 years old. So what do we do in terms of our own sort of impulse to believe that something is going to happen tomorrow or next week or in the new year, right? All of a sudden we realize that these words have been spoken over time, not just for decades, not just for centuries, but for millennia. When will the instruments of war give way to instruments of peace? And we have to wonder, which, by the way, is one, maybe not the only, but is certainly one of the reasons that we have to believe in hope. It is not a diminishing principle that somehow, no, and it's not optimism. This is something that we may not be able to see, but we believe that it is there. And we cannot only collapse our beliefs in what is immediately in front of us. You know, sometimes some of our leaders only have a vision that they can see. But part of the challenge that we have when we read these texts is to have a vision that really might be beyond what we can see, but we have to hope. So what do? You have this, here's Micah's text. He shall judge between many peoples and shall arbitrate between strong nations far away. They shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks, and that nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore. Excuse me. So, the idea of reading this is not for us to say, I'm glad we don't use spears and anymore. Okay. I think it's fair to say, if that's our conclusion, we're missing the point. Okay? It is not to say, somehow spears and swords are a time gone by, and thankfully now. The whole idea is, what do we do with a text such as this? In a time when not only is there war, but also the constant beating of drums about war and warfare, and talk of war. And we have the prophets who are saying, essentially, this cannot continue. We cannot have the Prince of Peace, that we extol the virtues of believing in a season of Advent. Literally, Advent, meaning what? Coming, toward the coming. Toward the coming. And to say that we believe in a wonderful counselor and the Prince of Peace, oh, by the way, wink, wink, theoretically. No. It's one of these things. You either believe or you don't. And if you say you believe, which we say every single Sunday in so many different ways as part of the liturgy, most notably in the formal expression of our faith in the Creed, in the Apostles' Creed, and from time to time in the Nicene Creed that begins what? We. So not only do I believe, but collectively we believe. But the word creed, as you know, yes, we translate it as belief and believe. As in, and we have the Romance languages that have picked up on that, but the word means what? Heart. That's what the root of the word in Latin means. So when you say you believe, you are saying, I give my heart to. That's what the word means. And so if we say we believe in the Prince of Peace, we are saying, both individually and collectively, that I and we give our hearts to this. And we cannot give our hearts to something wink, wink. We do not love each other theoretically. So what do we do, frankly, in the promotion of peace? What do we do in saying this has to be a time for peace, a season for peace? And some folks, not us in this room, might say, Micah. Who is this Micah anyway? And then, even more well known, is the Isaiah 2 text, which it's a little bit different, but you will see the language is substantially the same in terms of the vocabulary. He shall judge between the nations and shall arbitrate for many peoples. They shall beat their swords into plowshares, their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore. Now, you'll forgive me if I say at this moment that what strikes me here, strangely enough, is not so much that they are essentially a sort of repeating each other. And by the way, they come from the same era. There are 4 8th century prophets: Amos, Isaiah, what we might call first Isaiah, Isaiah of Jerusalem, which is where all of these texts come from. 3rd, Micah, and 4th, Hosea. They are not 5, they're not 3. This is not a smorgasbord. You don't get to choose. There are 4, and they are absolutely focused on matters of justice, again, and again. And war is one of those. And what strikes me, among other things, in this text is not only that, oh yes, this is reminiscent of Micah, or Micah is reminiscent of Isaiah. It's the last line. It's the last line. Neither shall they learn war anymore. We're not born thinking of war or hatred. No. We're not born, with the kind of divisiveness that have crept into the soul of who we are, both as a nation and, frankly, as a world. No. And we know this for a fact because we actually have videos and recordings of the 1930s where kids were taught in schools during the Hitler regime what to look for, how to distinguish, who are the pure. And this is not something you're reading in Mein Kampf. There are recordings, video recordings of this in the schools with sketches. So we learn, and there has to be a time when we do not teach, and that's the part that is inherent in that statement. We learn things because we teach things. They go together. And there has to be a time when those of us who know should not teach so that others do not learn, whether it's war or whether it's hatred.
I was going to say, my version says, nor will they train for war anymore instead of learning. Different perspective.
It is, but it's very sort of nice. Because that presupposes what? It presupposes war is here to stay, and in order for it to remain viable, what do you need to do? Train. Here's the thing. You can go, you don't have to depend on me finding this for you. You can go and find translations of the Bible, some of which will make you wonder, are we reading the same text? And some Bibles that parade as translations are actually paraphrases, right? You know. The Living Bible is one. It's maybe, I don't know if it's the most well-known, but it's certainly one that's out there. It's not a translation, right? It's a paraphrase of what's there. So in order for this to happen, right, it can only happen when we decide that we could no longer teach this. I'm going to give you, this is not homework, but I'll give you an example. And several years ago, I wrote a little piece about this that got published in the collection. And I haven't looked at it for a while. And it was something along the line of the people who are going into the Babylonian exile. We have this very straightforward juxtaposition of peace versus militarism. It was militarism that brought this about, and the only way this would end peaceably was through shalom. And I developed that article as a chapter in the book. But in there, I talked about leaders who, in dramatic moments, decided that enough is enough. So when you have a moment, you have to take my word for it, when you have a moment, go back and read about a sort of somewhat ancient king. This is not sort of, fictional character, but a king by the name of Ashoka. Okay? Go back and read about Ashoka, who for most of his reign, was, powerful.
Is this a biblical figure?
No. It's an Indian figure, Ashoka, right? And in fact, was militarily fairly dominant. But it was in a pivotal moment where in fact he had won, but as he surveyed the loss of lives, and is described as bodies lying in a field, he made the extraordinary decision that this could not continue. That instead of that, he will begin to plant trees and line the sort of avenues and so on. He would begin by creating much more of an environment that, quote, is peaceful. And did, which means that we have within us the capacity to do this, if only we would do it. But it's here. And we can, I don't want to use words that is, but we can redact this if we wish. We're familiar, right?
I have a question. What does a pruning hook look like?
I have no idea. But if you have ever pruned trees, right? I don't know what the instrument is called, but I have done that. And presumably, it's much more kind of fancy these days. But that's what it's about. And here's the thing. I don't want to destroy this metaphor. But when you prune something, it also does what?
Comes back.
You believe, and you believe that it will continue to grow. You prune it, you don't destroy it, but you believe that tomorrow, next year, next month, it's going to come back. So it's also actually an instrument of hope, if you think about it. You have to believe this. Sir.
Can I share the thoughts with the
Sure,
revelation?
sure.
Listen, next year is the year of salvation. It's the year in which Jesus, well, I won't talk about with details, but it's the year in which humanity understands the meaning of salvation, because our Jesus says that the one who doesn't enter into the belly of his mother, no, who doesn't be as a child, he said that, no? And the one,
I'll repeat.
doesn't enter into the belly of his mother cannot get into the kingdom of God.
Yeah, like,
And
be like
the,
Right.
the meaning of that sentence is that when we are in the belly of our mother, we are all mother cells. The mother cell was discovered in my body, and the cure getting in my body. And the mother cell is the salvation, because when God wants, He can, or God or the pastor can make understand to the sheep. You see, no? Oveja.
Mm.
That by a God he can get all his body more cells, and his body can be the transported when he died and be in the kingdom of God and be eaten, because the eternity is the mother cell.
Okay. So let me, and so, I think it's the text. It's an important text, and it is one that is used from time to time by folks to talk about how one comes into the kingdom of God, and it's a text that has to do, of course, with what does it mean, and it's the Nicodemus text, right? And what does it mean? And it's the reference to be born again. And the question that then follows up that, how can I enter into my mother's womb again? And of course, the whole idea is not to take this literally, but to understand what it means again, to change and to be transformed. So when we move forward here, I want to, as promised, talk a little bit about wisdom. And the opening books within, the opening chapters within the book of Proverbs, the first 9 chapters, right, is often referred to as the wisdom book. And the important part of this is here, right? It would be easy, again, not for us in this room, I'm serious, or not for us at Good Shepherd, or maybe for many of us outside of this environment, but it would be easy for folks to say, once again, you know, these prophets, they have a chip on their shoulders, right? And actually, probably, yep, they do. But it's not only the prophets, right? If we start redacting the Bible, Jefferson, if we start redacting the Bible, we are going to be left with a very, very slim volume, particularly if we're redacting issues of justice and issues of peace. Here in Proverbs, I thought it was a sort of a striking thing. Her ways are ways of pleasantness, and all of her paths are peace. Okay, who are we talking about here? Wisdom. Okay, the Septuagint, the Greek version, right, translates shalom here. Now, you may not immediately recognize the Greek word, even though we have an English word. We have English names based on that Greek word. And of course, we have children and grandchildren, girls, women with that name, and that name, of course, is Irene, okay? Irene, okay? Irene, right? Which, of course, is the root of the word, the Greek word peace, okay? Irene, okay? Or here, it's translated peaceful and peacemaking, and that's all well and good, right? But I think that's too narrow. This is not only about peacemaking. It is really an invitation that is to be understood, broadly construed as wholeness. What does it mean for us as individuals to be whole? Clearly, war is part of it. But it's not only the absence of war. It's us. We cannot walk away and say, well, you know, I am not involved in war. No. As it goes for one of us, it goes for all of us. And I know it's we've heard these statements, you know, Martin Luther King used it, but going back to the Greek philosopher, Thucydides once says that we will only stop injustice when those of us who are not directly affected by it begin to use our voice and actions against it. So how it go, and this is an ancient Greek thinker. This is not, you know, so it's not something that we are saying, well, this is just something that happened in the last generation or the last decade. No, it's ongoing. I will tell you, this is not trade secrets. When you see what happened at Bondi Beach, when you see what happened at Brown, which I have to say hits closer to home, we cannot walk away and say, well, you know, it's not my institution, or they were not my students, or I'm not Jewish, or I'm not celebrating Hanukkah. No. What happens to one of us should, in fact, matter to all of us. And peaceful here is important, but it's not enough. It has to be more. St. Jerome's Vulgate, which you recognize it, again, talks about peace producing and peacemaking once again, right? And that's the Latin translation of the text, right? It is not wrong, but I will go back to shalom again and again and again, in part because it is so massively inclusive. What does it mean for us as individuals, as a community, as a nation, as a world, to be whole? For me, that's the question of shalom. And what does it mean for us not only to repeat this? That might be important. But we also know that in more than one text within the prophets, there were those who were repeating peace, peace, when there was no peace. Which is a way of saying that if I say this often enough, it becomes true, right? Except our lives and the environment in which we find ourselves make it very clear that it's not true. It's not true. But maybe it's particularly in times of fragmented relationships, fractured relationships, as we do now, and we have to believe, if we are even remotely attentive, and I know we are, we have to believe this is the world in which we live right now. And maybe these prophets for 3,000 years and we don't have the context of Proverbs. We don't ever speak about, well, let me tell you about the context, right? It's wide. But we know for thousands of years, these words have been etched in so many different ways, including our hearts. And the question is, what are we going to do about it? Wisdom is consistently, it's feminine, by the way. The word is feminine. Wisdom is personified as a woman. And as we read these opening chapters of Proverbs, it's instructing, it's warning, and ultimately it's offering life. And that's the thing about it, right? It would be easy to say, you know what? Remember Jonah? It would be easy to say, I have a sermon for everyone. Nineveh, you're going to be destroyed in 40 days. Good luck. Okay? I mean, that was his sermon. It's got to be one of the worst sermons. And he sits, as Pastor Jan reminded me a couple weeks ago, he sits in the east of the city, where the place of the dead, in the cemetery, waiting to see what would happen. Right? By the way, he's rooting for God to destroy the city. Even though God said, no. But I'm just going to root for it anyway. And by the way, while I'm at it, let me build a tent for myself, maybe have a picnic while I see it go up in flames. Our kind of guy. But the prophets actually, despite everything, provide for us in so many ways, and this is an example in Proverbs of something that goes beyond just destruction. It's more than just destruction. So this is what we have. Happy is the one. This is, by the way, just be very clear. This is not happy as in giddy. I know we often say that somebody, and I've said this to my faculty, and it's always ends with laughter, because somebody would say, Dr. Gosai, would you mind doing this? And I would say, I'm happy to do this, but not in a giddy way. Okay? I'm available. I will do this. Happy is the one who finds wisdom. Wisdom surpasses silver and gold and jewels. Wisdom holds long life and riches. And her ways are pleasantness, her paths are peace. She is a tree of life to those who grasp her. This is what we seek. This is not about power. This is not about creating an environment that is gilded. And I use that word advisedly. I have no one in mind. But gilded things, what? Frankly, they're artificial. That's what they are. They are made to look. And we talk about gilded ages. Have you known of a gilded age that has gone on forever? No. But wisdom is not about silver and gold and jewels. It is not about creating a gilded environment. It is about life. It is about peace. And it is about peace, but it cannot be about peace that is just sort of out there. It's peace that we must do what? Grasp it. So it becomes not just a part of who we are, it becomes who we are. It's not an appendix. It's not on the margins. And here is the thing. Wisdom was there from the beginning. not us in this room because we are enlightened, but there are those who cannot imagine that wisdom, being female, could have been with God from the beginning. So let me say this as clearly as I know how. Too bad. Because it's there from the beginning. Whether it's the word verbum or logos or hokmah, here is the thing. The idea of wisdom and what wisdom stands for is not something that came later as an appendix. It's there at the heart and soul of who we are. And it's also, among many things, about peace. But in case you're wondering, yet again, if there are other instances, in the book of Judges, in the context of war, no less. And by the way, ancient Israel, both the north and the south, by the way, long before we have north and south in this country, there were. And anyone remembers how they were divided? Yeah, but why?
Judah was in the bottom.
Yeah, but why? What divides us anyway? Tribes? It's old-fashioned. It's power. And chutzpah. Yeah. It's Rehoboam saying, we can do this. It's hubris. But I'm not thinking of anyone today. I want to be very clear about that. We don't have anyone with chutzpah and hubris, and power, and silver and gold, and gilded. But here, the kings of ancient Israel, some of them were a real doozy.
Sure.
Peace to you, do not fear, you will not die. The Lord is peace. By the way, I don't know how else to put it. When we say, when we in the liturgy, I mean, think about this. When we in the liturgy says what? Peace be with you. Again, I'm serious, and I hope it doesn't apply to any of us, but when we say that, we better believe that in the spoken word, it's an event. When I say peace be unto you and I speak those words, it becomes a reality. We better believe that. And we have to believe that it has to do with wholeness and with goodness. And it's combined with pleasantness and joy. It can't just be we taking the time of peace. I'll give you an example that to this day I think about it, and when I was in graduate school in the great state of Minnesota, and for those of you who are wearing, down coats when it's 65 degrees, I pity you. And I remember I was in the Twin Cities, and our son at the time was about, I think, he was just over 2. And I was doing an internship at this downtown St. Paul church. And the time for peace came. And, my son Nathan is on the pew and doing exactly as we do, right? Sharing the peace. And there was a gentleman in the pew behind us who said no. I kid you not, who said no to my son that kids should not be in the service here. I'm not. Now, keep in mind, my son now, right, is obviously much older and married with a family and a profession, a vocation, I'd like to believe. But that lingers on. For whom is peace granted? And when we talk about learning war and teaching, we have an adult saying to a child, peace is not for you. This is not a sort of an apocryphal, I saw this and looked at my son, who looked at me and wondered, Dad, make no mistake about it. We teach or not teach. And so when we say peace be unto you, we have, these things are all interconnected, they're all intersected. Let me invite you to think about this. When you say peace be unto you, and I am serious, you have to believe that not only do I mean it, but there is something about that that becomes real. Or it's a farce. It has to be real. Peace be unto you. And so to show how things are intersected, I take you back to Genesis 1. How does creation come into being? It is through the spoken word. And the spoken word is an event. And so when we say, peace be unto you, God's peace be with you, do good, walk well, these statements are not to be seen as casting, kind of throwaway statements. They need to become a state of being. Peace be to you, the Lord is peace. We cannot say that we are created in the image of God, but the whole peace thing. Oops. Or in the book of Kings, and I want to be clear, King Solomon, whose name means what? Peace. The fact that your name means peace doesn't mean, right? Remember, Zedekiah, Lord is righteous, right? Except he really wasn't. So he had peace on all sides. During Solomon's lifetime, Judah and Israel lived in safety. So even a king who, Solomon, I think he was a conflicted kind of person. But he wanted what for his people? He asked for what? He asked for wisdom to lead. Didn't use it well, but he asked for wisdom. And then he enslaved his people, and opened up. But he asked for wisdom because there is a recognition that in so doing, the possibility of peace and safety can exist, if in fact you take wisdom seriously. So we have these texts, if you will, in the prophets, in the writings, in what is called wisdom literature. We have these texts in the historical writings. We have these texts in Genesis. We have these texts in Exodus. How is it that we live in peace? That's the question. What do these prophets and these writings mean for us today? That's the question. What does it mean for us to say, Emmanuel, God with us, today? With the recognition that when we say peace, it is not simply a throwaway statement. Peace, peace. That's what Hananiah said when there was no peace. What does it mean for us? That, to me, that's the question. It cannot simply be a text of historical reminiscence. 3,000 years later, or 2,500 years later, what does it mean for us in a season of Advent to talk about the Prince of Peace? What does it mean for us to hold each other with a statement that says, peace be unto you? That's the question. All right, we'll stop there. Now, we don't meet next week. So two things will happen next week. One, we don't meet, and secondly, importantly for you, there will be no donuts. So, sadly. But, just so that you know, in case you're wondering if this theme is exhausted, the answer is no. This is where we pick up in January with the same theme. And I think we're still going to be here in what Alan has characterized as the donut room. Okay. All right. Thanks, everyone, again. Okay. Yeah, thanks.